Evaluation Room, the only way to start your day.
You have to understand that the way you framed your question, you're putting the onus on the current regime to do what it needs to do to empower and have functions devolved. In terms of whether devolved functions, for example, have been effectively devolved, I would say not quite. We are in a low 4 to 5 because we still have a lot of functions that have remained in national government. And when that happens, of course, resources don't follow the functions, and then you have a scenario where counties are expecting to undertake their constitutionally mandated functions without resources following. That becomes a key talking point. And you have really key areas such as healthcare, roads and infrastructure, all these things, which if funds don't follow, then you have an issue with that. So I would score it a low 6 in terms of overall view. But on specifics sectors, you can then score. If it's healthcare, probably a 4. If it's infrastructure, and so on and so forth. We had a state of address from the Council of Governors just the other day. And of course, the trouble with that is that it's a snapshot of where devolution is holistically, sort of an aggregated view, which can also be misleading because when you take a mean score of devolution, you have counties which are performing better than others. You have counties that are doing better in own source revenue than others. If you take Kiambu, for instance, it scores very well when it comes to own source revenue, and others not so much. And others have an unfair advantage. If you take Narok, for instance, they have national parks, so their own source revenue is going to be much higher. Same case as Nairobi. So in ballpark, I think in the last 13 years, we can say, yes, devolved services have come closer to people, and that's a win. Now, whether that has been effective and efficient, that's up for discussion.
Kevin, one asks the question then, with the constitution that you say, which is a proper tool that we have to use as a country, just going back to the proverb that we have as a country, have Kenyans realized the potential, the full, what one would say, meat that comes with devolution, as it were?
Very good question, Dennis. From what we see happening in the counties, when you say Kenyans, it is quite a bothersome description because you have Kenyans who are Kenyans and you have Kenyans who are not Kenyans when it comes to governance. So politically speaking, Kenyans who are Kenyans are those who are in leadership or basically political leadership positions. And so when you talk about devolution, the fruits of devolution therefore accrue to those Kenyans who are the real Kenyans, in inverted commas, and that is largely the political class. So the citizens who are a majority of Kenyans who are not Kenyans, in my view, have not understood the benefits of devolution. And that is why we still have health sector struggling. Doctors are on strike as we speak. Nurses were at the COG, Delta House a few days ago. We still have challenges with a huge sector, which is a breadbasket of the country, like agriculture. We have serious challenges with leadership when you talk about infrastructure, where you have to have governors, having challenges with senators because of a 10 billion shillings, what's called the roads maintenance levy, So many things that are happening that are constitutional, but Kenyans who are largely the people who expect services are not feeling these services, Dennis. So that's quite a big challenge. And a lot of these challenges ascribe to the political infrastructure, the political space that we have. And that is why, as Mheshimiwa Kigara says, we still have an audit of close to 68 billion shillings, or actually 168 billion, that is still held by national government on functions that are supposed to be sent to county governments, so that actually the counties who are the most closest to the citizens adjudicate and implement these functions.
Why is it held? Why is this 68 billion shillings held by national government that should go to counties?
Of course, the law expects that if you look at Schedule 4, we have functions that are supposed to be done by national government and those that are supposed to be done by county governments. But since 2014, 2015, 2013, 2014, when we had the transition authority, the institution that was supposed to help us, to transit functions, institutions, etc., that came up with a very clear report that therefore needed to be adopted by almost everyone to ensure that functions go to counties. Why they are still held is lack of political goodwill, in my view. So that when we have like the devolution conferences, we have the who is who's in politics, the real Kenyans who are Kenyans come and say within 6 months, we are going to devolve these functions, but they are never done. As we speak, the State Department of Devolution and other stakeholders like County Governance Watch and others have done an audit of what needs to be sent to counties and how much, when you talk about financing these functions, we know how much it is. Why it can't be done, in my view, is just mere lack of political goodwill.
Why it can't be done or won't be done, or then why do county assemblies or national assemblies continue to function within a system whereby the very tenets of devolution, whereby we call into account senators, members of the county assembly, such as yourself, Honorable Kigara, that why do we allow the functions to continue knowing full well that a transitional authority, for example, that came into play and came up with a report on how this implementation would happen, but we kind of ignore that, don't we? And we just go ahead and do the work as though, okay, well, if they're going to release 68 billion shillings, if they're going to, because essentially we're not just talking about the release of 68 billion shillings, we're talking about the release of control.
Correct.
So why continue to operate knowing full well that the law is actually not being followed?
Actually, that's where the rubber meets the road, if you ask me. You see, the Constitution under Article 174 is very express in what it sets out to get. And ideally, what the Constitution wants is members of communities to have decision-making power for themselves. This is to say, they want to manage their own affairs. In fact, the Constitution is very express. It says communities should manage their own affairs. To do that, you have all these arms of government which are supposed to do what they do. Now, what happens, by the way, if you have a community managing its own affairs, it's then empowered. An empowered community makes very different political decisions. So you start from a level of where funds are supposed to be devolved. You have those systems starting to be curtailed. I'll give you an example. We are in the financial year 2026-2027. We have what we call division of revenue allocation. Division of revenue allocation is where you have Parliament coming and deciding what share of the cake is going to go to counties, right? Now, it is envisioned, and the drafters of our Constitution just said, the most recent audited revenues, we go by that, and then we decide 15% of that goes to counties. We're in the last financial year for those of us who are in elected politics, right? But the division of revenue allocation that
actually,
we're using
according
today,
to the High Court,
well,
as of Friday, we're done.
I followed what Willis was saying, and so we could be out of office anytime, right? But let's assume we have another year to go. Now, the good folks at the National Parliament see it fit to give us what we call a constitutional baseline to determine our income as the 2022-2023 audited accounts. Okay? Now, not just audited accounts, but audited revenue. Now, what is important here to note for Kenyans is that we're looking at audited and approved revenues. So we have audited accounts for 2023-2024, audited accounts for 2024-2025, still seated, gathering dust. And by the way, we don't require parliamentarians to go and re-audit or do anything new. They're just supposed to take a report from the from the Auditor General, put it in front of the floor of the House, debate it, approve it, set up constitutional baseline. Now, what is the net effect of that not happening? It means we're using a 2 trillion budget figure, right, to determine the cake which is being served today, as opposed to a potential 2.5 trillion, I believe. 2.9 trillion.
Yeah.
The compounding effect is that right now counties are being denied somewhere near 70 to 80 billion in potential revenue. Now, when we talk about empowering communities and funds following. There's, we do public participation when we want to do development. We go right to the village, you ask people, what are your priorities? And they'll say, we want a bridge here, we want a level 2 hospital here, we want our roads graveled. But when you look at the resources which are supposed to come, you're saying, look, the economy hasn't grown from 2022. We're in 2026, 2027 financial year. But you're telling those folks, we really can't afford some of these things because the figures of 2022 say, yeah, we don't deserve. When you don't give counties their projected, let's call it 75 billion, give or take, you're basically saying a whole month worth of exchequer releases. Actually, it's about a month and a half. If you compound that, you're basically saying Kiambu, for instance, gets about 1.1 billion. You're saying we are less about 200 billion worth of services. That's a whole vote line that can take care of nurses alone, right?
Yes.
So I don't understand how this megalomaniac way of doing things in Parliament is being allowed to thrive, essentially curtailing services to counties.
So, Kevin, is it by design? Because just based off the audited accounts, right, we are still operating with 22, 23.
Yeah.
So is it a question of no one has seen the need of amending that clause to say perhaps it is for the last financial year? Because now when you say the last financial year, it is immediate, you know what I mean? So it is a question of perhaps then Council of Governors and other stakeholders, senators as well, pushing amendment of the law to say the last year's account, the previous account, because then counties would be rightfully being given that which belongs to them. But that notwithstanding then, who's to blame here? Or is it by design that we choose to overlook that aspect?
Dennis, the challenge that exists is the capacity of who is going through the last audited accounts. You see, there is last financial year's accounts and there is a last audited accounts.
Account, yes.
And that is what the law says. That's what the law expects, that you engage with the last audited accounts. And we have a whole unit. We have within Parliament what is called the Parliamentary Audit Office. That also sits within the Parliamentary Budget Office. We have the Office of the Auditor General that is properly capacitated and has done its work effectively. So much so that even if we were to go by the last audited accounts, we would have them 2026, 2027, because the Auditor General has done her work effectively. The challenge is that these reports are received at Bunge. You understand? Now, the capacity of Parliament, in my view, is where the challenge sits. So that when you have all these committees that are supposed to go through these audited reports, what is this thing that is holding them, that is making them unable to execute and dispense of their responsibility? And so if we can be able to probably review that particular process, and if there is a need for an amendment, maybe have a mechanism that also allows other interested parties, so that parliamentary assessment of the audit report is not a necessity as a requirement for the budget process. Because as it is right now, the law expects that we sum our budget on the last audited accounts, which now, of course, is 4 years behind. I also know the kind of efforts that are going on to be able to fast-track this process, working with, of course, the National Treasury, the Auditor General, and the kind of capacity that is being boosted within these offices. But the challenge still rests within Parliament, so that if we can be able to have some sort of a boost or some sort of mioto inaongezwa kule bungeni for the committees that need to review these reports, then that is where the problem is. And you see, for parliamentarians who are also the budget, the ones who appropriate the budgets, it is in their interest that we are undertaking a retraction of the budget process based on where they are, and where they are is not in the citizens' interest. Remember that the people we are talking about have agencies or mechanisms like NGCDF, etc. They might not be interested so much in what the counties are losing, that therefore make it so hard for the county governments to deliver services to the people, because that is not a conversation that they want to have. Why? Because if you look at the NGCDF Act, for example, it is very, very clear what it needs to do. Infrastructure, security, emergencies. Those are the three main things, which of course are not what county governments in a much more deeper sense would be engaging in. So it would be of their very little interest to see that counties have money to be able to deliver services. Because again, there's a political, equation here. There are parliamentarians, MP, National Assembly reps who want to be governors, who want to be senators, etc. Now, we have to get to a level where we agree that there is a point in time when you cease being a governor, you cease being a senator, you cease being that elected leader. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? One. Number two, when you ultimately retire and you go to the village, do you want to get to levels where there is no health care? Do you want to get to levels where there are no roads like what we are seeing right now? So it should be, and it must be, in my view, in the interest of every politician to ensure that what the law says works, and that everybody's hands is on deck to ensure that we give the best to Kenyans. So in short, therefore, again, political goodwill. There is no reason why parliamentarians should dilly-dally on reviewing the reports that are therefore supposed to be used to ensure that we have proper appropriation of budgets.
When are we going to have a stop? Because is it possible to work in devolution, for example, and then be apolitical? Because oftentimes we'll keep saying, the politics of the day matter. Can I be bold enough to say that it shouldn't?
Of course.
That there is a constitution, it's in black and white, what says needs to be done. There are budgets, there are laws that are made. Why do we always want to spice or pepper the function with politics? Can we just, there's room for the politics, which we've seen very clearly happening. But when it comes to bread and butter issues, when it comes to brick and mortar, when it comes to infrastructure, why do we always have to have the crutch of, it's political and I have to do what, the puppet master says? It smacks of an immature dispensation. When can we actually do that, do you think?
I think that's one of the things I'll give it to the late Honorable Raila's view was. Baba had this point that for effective governance to happen, all arms and articles of Constitution have to be respected. They have to be given space to thrive. Baba's view was very clear. He said, look, counties are not here to simply exist. They have to be empowered. They have to thrive. And to that effect, immediately actually after this Kenya Kwanza government took over, you remember there was the NADCO thing, because Kenyans were up in arms and said, look, the cost of rising is unsustainably high. So sit down, Kalonzo Musyoka, Kimani Ichung'wah, sit down and come up with views in which we can propose to government to improve this. One of the key themes that even now is in the 10-point agenda was strengthening and protecting devolution. It has always been there. Baba has always talked about this. Even during BBI's time, he said, look, if we're going to improve lives of people, we have to protect, actually, and respect what devolution stands for. He was very clear that this goes all the way down to communities. Now, Kevin is talking about goodwill, and this is what we're talking about. Today, the good friends at Parliament are in Naivasha, sitting down to discuss ways to improve Kenyans' lives. Okay? In that, one of the things to discuss there was devolution, because it was in the 10-point agenda. Granted, the broad-based government takes a different view of things. It's like, okay, we're going to look at more political. But if they are keen, devolution should be one of the things they look at. Now, if you drill down to specifics, they'll tell you, look, we've even done what Raila's recommendation was in NADCO, at the very least give counties 20% of the revenue. But you're giving them 20% of old revenue. So you're basically just hoodwinking or basically gaslighting Kenyans that we are doing this, but nobody has the goodwill. I actually think the way forward with this is to tie some of parliamentary functions, like the PSC, to the same revenue. They said, look, if you're going to do a budget on your items, we are going to follow the same formula. We look at your last audited revenues, and that's where you're going to get. I'm telling you, things will flow very quickly if you do something like that. But otherwise, you even have functions. It's the very same people who are holding the RMLF funds. In Kiambu here, we've only received 118 million out of a possible, I think, 700 billion to do a function that is critical, access roads. There's a farmer there who wants to get their produce from their farm to the market. It is not begging. You've given them free fertilizer, you've given them free seedlings, but they can't get to the market. It's basics.
Okay, let's take a break. I think it's necessary at this point. To come back and understand then why it's so difficult. I mean, Kev, on County Watch, to then be able to understand and see that it's very clear what was demarcated. The people who put together Constitution, which was assented to by the people of the country, said this is the way in which we must operate. It sounds to me that you need to take the square peg, put it in the square hole. It's simple. And that you don't try to fit something else that doesn't fit. But apparently, it's not so simple in terms of practice. Let's come back and continue this conversation. Stay with us.
This is the
operate at the ward level. The in my opinion, one of the most important units of devolution as the MCA, whereby we're talking at that ward level, figuring out what it is exactly that needs to be done so that then that, goes up. Then you have senators who then oversight to make sure that you're actually spending your money and doing it right. And that you take control, because there was a problem with control being at the national level. So we said, okay, fine, let's take this control and let's disseminate it around the country, number one. At the same time, what you do with the one stone is that you kill the second bird of developing the country. That we've seen magnificent things happen, whereby people then go back to the counties and actually get something done. It's a good thing. Why wouldn't you want then that to continue or to be fully established? I'm at a loss.
I like how you're describing it, because that really is that's how it's supposed to be. That's purely how the devolved system of governance of Kenya was envisioned and is supposed to operate. That the members of county assemblies know there are three constitutionally allocated mandates, they execute them effectively, and that there should be no clash of functions. That the executive will also do its work with the entire government, led by excellency governors, and that they manage and execute these responsibilities. And the citizens at their level will also be able to engage, public participation, development of CIDP, where they put together their priorities. The ADP comes in and fills some gaps that may exist. You have the supplementary budget that also comes, and in the areas where citizens feel like, we over-prioritized or budgeted, then we can be able to review our budgets. So that really is the expectation. But as it is, and what we see happening is really not, as they say, the rubber is not meeting the road there, because again, going back to politics, in my view, I believe that we just need good manners within our leaders and the leadership in place, both at the national and county levels, to do the right things right. Remember that we have an agency called the Intergovernmental Relations and Technical Committee that has the full power and mandate, working together with the State Department of Devolution. And the PS, Michael Laon, has been doing a very good work there with his officers. All the functions we are talking about have been identified from TEA in 2013, 2014. They have been costed. They have been unbundled. Mheshimiwa, we call it unbundling. Unbundling, right?
Yes, correct.
And they are always costed every year, including this year. While we were in Homa Bay last year, the devolution conference, it was done. Right now, as we speak about the strike of nurses and doctors, and bundling of how much it will cost to fully implement the health sector programs, is being done up to Friday last week when the state of devolution address was done. But why it becomes so difficult to fully implement, honestly, I cannot say. But of course, the politics revolve around a number of issues. One is a human resource. Why do we talk about ghost workers in county governments? You know, is it that there is a resource that is being pocketed from somewhere that is supposed to be, used for certain resources?
Yes.
That these people that are ghosts are being paid and people are not expected to see? You know, when you talk about, human health, human resource, that's one of the examples. And if you are to look at how much it costs to have a doctor in a health facility or a nurse in a health facility, including all the equipment, Dennis and do, it is a lot of money. Why would the one single ministry, and I came across my good friend, Madam P.S. Mudhoni, she's in one of your studios here this morning as we're also speaking here, and you are talking about this. Why is it so difficult when the Constitution of Kenya says that the national government shall have the policy process for health and that health is fully devolved? Why don't you just allow it? Why do you want to have over 700 billion for one single ministry approximately for resources that are almost not even a half of what all the 47 county governments are receiving, because we know they are receiving 420 billion for this year? I do not think that it is fair. I do not think that it is proper. But again, as Kenyans keep saying vitu kwa ground ni tofauti, but we also must exercise citizen agency to ensure that we do the right thing, that the people that we put in office are those who also commit to actually follow the law and implement devolution as is expected.
Kigara,
Yes.
you see, when you talk about unbundling of resources, unbundling of functions, right? The Constitution, lawyers would say, is very clear on what is devolved and what is not devolved, right? So you talk about healthcare is devolved, right? Agriculture, devolved.
Yes.
But these functions predominantly have remained at the national level, which then I'm just asking a simple question then. For all these years since 2013, have we been presiding over an illegality? Because if functions that ought to be handled by the counties are being held by the national government, that's an illegality because it's parallel to what the Constitution says. And many have argued that it is because they remain being domiciled at the national level because of the resources associated with these functions, So here we're talking about markets. You see, national government is implementing markets in the counties. Then if that's the case, what exactly is the county, the governor, supposed to be implementing? Is something as basic as a market is being done by the national government. So have we been presiding over an illegality on the basis that is pesa tutaachilia leo, tutaachilia pole pole?
Dennis, I started by saying an informed people make very different political decisions. And so you can argue that you do not want to expressly empower people to that level that we are talking about today, because tomorrow they will wake up and make very different political decisions. And it's actually worse than how you're describing it. If you look at, for example, agriculture is a function that is fully devolved.
Yes.
Fully. Yet, the Ministry of Agriculture has, in the national government, has a budget of about 86 billion. 86 billion. Now, of one of the functions that they will tell us they want to do is a program called vaccination of livestock. Why? Because we want our cattle and lamb to be export grade. Okay? Fantastic. We understand that. Fine. The trouble is, when you then come to the county and you have all structures, you have chief officers, directors, veterinary doctors, who can do the same function. And by the way, the Department for Livestock came and said, look, we need about 5 billion to vaccinate about 20 million livestock, right? You look at the budget item. First of all, I argue they should not be having that 86 billion in the first place. But they have now a function that requires 5 billion, which is not in this budget anyway. We tried to look for it, we couldn't find it. But it's there. Now, look at the flip side of that, healthcare. Healthcare is one of the most critical and budget-intensive item for any government, whether national or county. Now, healthcare, national government only takes care of referral hospitals, which are about, 6 referral hospitals in the country?
They're around 8 now.
About 8.
We
okay.
have some additional.
You have about 37 to 40 level 5 hospitals and almost 1,000 level 4 hospitals in the country. the sheer work, the sheer responsibility entrusted to counties is so overwhelming that you can't tell me that you're happy to devolve partly a healthcare function to counties so that they can manage human lives. But for vaccination, for cattle, that's where they draw the line. This one is a national importance issue. We will do the injecting of cattle. But for human beings, this one you can take. And we'll give you 480 billion. By the way, the wage bill alone for healthcare workers in counties is about a quarter. Whatever we get, whatever counties get, a quarter of that goes to paying healthcare. And they're still striking because they're not getting their dues because of CBAs and everything else. But it is so intensive that I don't think the government has a clue on the impact of not seeing through some of these functions. You know, the other day I had a cabinet secretary.
Really?
Yes, I don't think they do. The other day a cabinet secretary stood up and said, look, he was in Kiambu and said, look, Kiambu should be aligned to the government of the day, because if you do that, we'll be happy to step in and help in things like drainage.
But that's directly against the tenets
Correct.
of the Constitution, whereas devolution is concerned. It's directly against. It says very clearly, and I'm going to put it in layman's terms, that why you have this in the first place is so that very thing that you said
Yes.
does not occur. That you don't have to buddy up to the governments of the day for
Absolutely.
drainage to happen in a county. That it was done so that drainage could happen in a county.
So this is where they're trying to hoodwink Kenyans.
Yeah.
Do, because when you come and first of all, it's not in your docket to say that. It's not even anywhere near national government. Neither does it have a budget to do that in the first place. But for reasons best known to themselves, they will stand in front of a podium and say, this is what you need to do so that we can, you can be a friend of the government and you can get better resources. It is, and this is a cabinet. Why I bring up this example? Because this is an individual who sits in the cabinet and looks at the president and says, this is probably what I think we should do. This is very worrying for me. Yeah?
You see, part of what I think is happening, and we were in Garissa last week, and we were talking about some of this, what is called the devolution sensitization week. And I raised this question with some technical practitioners there, and we all agreed that when you devolve these functions the way we are envisioning them, then the president of the day who is campaigning would have no election agenda. Because remember that the Constitution devolved what really matters to the common person. So kiosks matter to the common mama mboga, roads matter a lot, health, education, If you fully give these to counties and governors, the president, you go to Siaya where I come from, he or she would have no reason. There is nothing you are telling people you want to do. But when you therefore muzzle counties and you make it look like the county governments are incompetent, that you have to come and launch kiosks like Dennis is saying, then of course the mamamboga there might imagine that it is the president who actually constructed the kiosk and not my MCA, not my governor, not the local leaders. And sometimes we think that is really the biggest hitch that we have when it comes to transfer of functions and, Schedule 4 and even the funds, the resources that are still held by national government, that the president might not have a reason to want to go and campaign in Lamu when everything is being done by the local leadership.
So is it by design? So is it by design to withhold some of this control? Because again, we've already said that it's not the actual shillings that you're holding. What you're doing is that you're holding control and power.
Sure. Yeah.
Is it by design to say that, well, we're not going to release this? You may not say it outright, you may not, consciously make an effort to express it, but is it then not exactly what you're doing, whereby you say, yes, we should actually cede control, but we're going to hang on to this control so that I can still come back to you tomorrow, the people of Kwale, the people of Lamu, the people of Garissa, the people of Homa Bay, and actually say, you know what, we're going to build this road for you.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to do it for you because, it's been a long time coming. So you're going to look at me. That time I'm not talking to you about the Constitution. I'm not talking to you about devolution, because if you knew that it is actually the process and activation of devolution that should sort out this thing that you're doing, then I can actually tell you, well, you know what? I'm not going to come to a rally and listen to you. I have things to do.
Precisely.
Absolutely. This, and you see, and as it is, members of county assemblies like myself are always at loggerheads with the governor because we want to share the podium Let's just be honest when it comes to development.
Yeah.
Right? So we never want a scenario where we can say the governor has done this, but the MCA has not done this. Right? But now it gets worse when you have the president come on top of all of us and says, I'm the one doing this. So everybody take a step back. We have money from affordable housing or whatever. We can do this for you. Take your money elsewhere. And remember that money has already been cut. So it's not what it should be anyway. But they'll say, we've given you more than enough. But because we're a good government, we will do this function for you. You go take your money elsewhere.
And it's not your job.
And it's not your job in the first place. So it's like, this is what you would call gaslighting. If you're talking to someone and you're just telling them, I can do this for you, but really, I'm nowhere near even delivering.
What's the pressure that then MCAs and governors do get when Wananchi have bought to the idea that we are not getting development because we are not aligned to the government? How is the pressure then from the stakeholders, Wananchi, who've given you the mandate?
Well, I'll tell you there's pressure, for sure. Because some of us stand on principle. I will never go to a rally where the president is because I believe I'm going to be held accountable to whatever he says. So I just won't do that. Now, if that means then development will be seen not to be for the MCA and for the president, so be it. I have no problem with that. I will sit with my people and I'll explain to them, look, this is a function of county government. If the president wants to do it, let him do it. But remember, there will come another government which is going to possibly reverse all this. So it's better to understand what the law says when it comes to development, who's supposed to do what. By the way, remember, in all this structure, one of the person who's most disadvantaged is an MCA because everybody else has a kitty to do something. The governors can recover. If markets are taken from Kiambu and the president says he's going to build one in Thika and one in Limuru and everywhere else, the governor can take his market to another sub-county, right? But an MCA can never really say, okay, if these people are fighting on these functions, where do I take my kitty so that at least the people who elected me see something of value? Everything seems to be hogged. The limelight, the development limelight is being hogged by the governors, but mostly the president of the day. And that's why Kevin is saying, especially this financial year, you will see more and more of the president and his team saying, if you align, this is what we're going to do. We've already said we will do. Remember, they keep saying the first 4 years or 5 years are for promising. We'll promise this to Metenga. Now we are ready to implement. So give us another term and we'll do this.
But Kevin, does both level of government understand that if the counties win, the national government wins? Is there that understanding that if we just devolve these functions, the counties get to do what it is they have to do, and we because we are the owners of the policy, we equally apply pressure to ensure that the counties just win and perform as expected? Is there an understanding that everybody will look good at the end of the day, or is it a question of even that which is the county, I must do it for me to look good?
The latter is the right one.
Okay.
The kind of competition, Dennis, that we see. Remember earlier on I said that the governor is always, if you're serving 2 terms, you want to be senator. You are an MP, you want to be senator, you want to be governor. If you are an MCA, I don't know what term you are serving.
It's my first.
If you are doing second, you want to be MP National Assembly, etc. So that kind of tug of war and the tussle will not allow for that understanding, Dennis, despite the fact that the law is very clear who is supposed to do what. We have enabling institutions. I mentioned IGRTC. We have IBEC that is chaired by the Deputy President. Of course, the other
not
day
anymore.
Functional
we saw, which is a good thing, because when it comes to accountability, it's very difficult to hold the Deputy President accountable even before Parliament. It's only a cabinet secretary who can be summoned to answer questions. So I think the president acted in proper wisdom to be able to take some of those functions to the prime cabinet secretary, because he can appear before Bunge and respond to questions, something which the deputy president, given his office, might maybe not be able to do. So you have IBEC, you have the summit that is chaired by the president, and together with all the 47 governors, all these conversations we are having here rest and are normally settled at that table. But the implementation aspect, even for MCAs, I liked it when the president said, I'm giving you financial autonomy in Homa Bay. And they actually signed the law to allow the MCAs
Yes,
to get
the
their
county
own budget.
assemblies.
I don't know whether you are getting your money.
Well, it hasn't started. The budget hasn't been uploaded, but in principle, yes.
Yeah, so we have very many good conversations that are supposed to provide an understanding, but when it gets to the levels of implementation, that understanding ceases at that point. And I think that for me, two things that might salvage this scenario is that, one, we must invest in civic and voter education. That Kenyans understand that when I see the president talking about markets in my area, that is not his responsibility.
Yeah.
And that when it is ultimately done, I win, he wins, the governor wins, and all of us wins.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us win. Of course, that might be different from the political face of it. So citizens, what County Governance Watch and others continue to do is to, provide that agency, give them information, empower them, let them know what is supposed to be done, including the budgetary allocations. Mm-hmm. Number two, our governance system, Dennis Ndu, I think is quite tragic towards the constitution, because we envisioned a parliamentary system where then you have a ceremonial president. Every day we have handshakes that therefore tend to lead us towards a parliamentary form of government, where you therefore have, you no longer talk about political parties. You talk about number of seats, that make laws, decide on budget, etc. But in a country where the president wants to run on a ticket that is competing with the ticket of the governor of a county, it will be very difficult to come and say, we have an understanding that you can do your things, you shine so that people vote for you, but my candidate in my party who is coming to campaign might not have anything to show for it. It becomes very difficult, therefore, which therefore leads us to the presidential form of government, where the more number of seats you have in MP, in parliament, the better president you are. So you have the leeway to change laws, you have the leeway to, play around with budgets. That, I think, is also a tragedy to our constitution. And as we celebrate many years since August 10, 2010, I think it is important that as we also talk about audit of this wonderful document, we also look at our form of governance. Can we be able to have a mechanism that allows the kind of understanding that Dennis is talking about? As it is right now, the politics of the day will make it so difficult for different divergent opinions of elected leaders to sit on a round table the way we are seated. They'll be saying, wewe ni wa UDA, wewe ni wa ODM, wewe hukufanya handshake, wewe ni linda mwananchi, wewe ni linda this, linda that. I think that is not a proper environment for an understanding that needs to come from the leadership to deliver services to the people.
Is there intent? Because I'll just go back to the law, whereby something could have happened, but in a trial, for example, oftentimes the intent will be prosecuted. That if you had an intent to do something, then we can judge you on that. But I almost feel that with devolution and its implementation, because we keep going back to implementation, that usually the politics of the day overrides this. And so there was never, for the majority, an intent to want to live out this devolution. Because had there been, because usually when we had a conversation that things don't go wrong, they start wrong. And so in the middle of it, you're not going to think that you can turn this thing to go in the opposite direction. So in the very beginning, if your intent was not to be an agent of devolution as constitutionally provided, then it's very difficult for us around about 13 years later to then come and say, can we? But no, if you didn't intend to do that, if you did it for your own political good, then sad to say, but we're not going to go anywhere. No?
No, absolutely. I believe the intent was subverted from the get-go in many of the cases. There has been attempts to right those wrongs, in my view, and I quoted what BBI was trying to achieve. Empowerment of MCAs by having their own kitty. Everybody was to have their own kitty. Everybody who is elected, devolved governments get 35%. Better structures of oversight. As it is, we still have very good structures of oversight. We have MCAs as the first level, we have Auditor General, we have the Senate. But even with those three structures, you still have ways of subverting the law. So it's clear to me that as long as we have a regime that does not want to see this through, it won't get done. And it's only going to get worse and worse because the next government will come and see, start and find a mess for the last 5 years, said, okay, by the time I write this mess, I will not be popular. Because once you start clearing a mess, you'll be told you are not seeing any development. You just do you first, and then we'll judge you for that. You remember when Kibaki came into power, the first thing he did for the first 2 or 3 years was to just clean government. There was no development going on. But he stood his ground, and by the time he was doing his second year, we could see infrastructure development, and he just wasn't talking, he was just getting on with these things. But he had people to support him, he had good cabinet secretaries, and I believe maybe that's why we went wrong. I mean, I can't say we lose hope completely. There's still hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but probably not with this regime, if you ask me.
Okay. Kevin Osido is the Executive Director of County Governance Watch, joined by the MCA for Ngenda Ward, Gatundu South, and the Minority Leader of the Kiambu Assembly, the Honourable Joe Kigara. Thank you, gentlemen, both. It's still a long conversation to be had, but that we can still talk about it means that there's still hope.
Sure.
Good morning, 9 a.m.
The latest news from around. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.